The Adventures of Princess Indolentia by Gabriel Ertzgard. That's me. Featuring artwork by Eleanor Verboyle. Now in a fairy tale land, there was a beautiful princess. And because she was the princess, she was, I'm afraid to say, a bit spoiled. She got anything she wanted. If that was a platter full of cherries, she got a platter full of cherries. If it was a room decorated with flowers and feathers, she got a room decorated with flowers and feathers. And she had servants to cater to her every whim. And no one worked harder than her old nurse. The princess would have the old woman brush her pretty hair for hours on end. And then she would have the old woman rub her dainty little feet. And as the nurse did these things, she would have funny sayings, such as, "Ouch, ouch, my arthritis is killing me," and "I won't have to rub anybody's feet when the revolution comes." And the princess would just laugh, because to her these were silly nonsense sayings. But much to her surprise, when she was about 14 years old, there was a revolution in the kingdom. So her parents sent her away to be safe until things settled down. And so she went to live with a walrus-like beast in his manor. Now this walrus-like beast was very old and very wise. He had been good friends with the princess's great-great-grandfather. And although he wasn't too impressed by the current king and queen, he still took in the princess out of a sense of loyalty to the family. The princess, however, soon discovered that life with the walrus-like beast was not what she was used to. She would try to order the servants to brush her beautiful hair. But the walrus-like beast would intervene and say, "That's not their job. You can brush your own hair." And she would try to tell an old woman to get down on the ground and rub her dainty feet. But the walrus-like beast would simply say, "Are you kidding me? You're trying to make an old woman crawl around and rub your feet? You're a perfectly healthy young woman. If you want your feet rubbed, rub them yourself." The princess was shocked at his cruelty, but there was nothing she could do, because he was lord of the manor. Now, as it turned out, the revolution was successful. The people of the kingdom overthrew the monarchy and declared a republic. However, the king and queen, when they fled into wealthy exile with a carriage full of jewels, never bothered to stop and pick up their daughter. This made the walrus-like beast quite grouchy, but he continued to look after the princess because, well, someone had to. And lucky for him, even if her parents never came back for her, someone else did come looking for her. A handsome prince from a neighboring kingdom had heard stories of the princess. And although the information he got was actually quite accurate, which is surprising considering how rumors go, he somehow got it into his head that she was being held captive by a terrible monster. So the prince rode off to rescue her. Well, when he showed up in the manor courtyard, the princess was immediately taken with the handsome youth. And he immediately fell for the beautiful princess, which he had been planning to do anyway. "I will rescue you," he said. "Yes, you're my hero," the princess declared. "Let her go, foul creature," he shouted at the walrus-like beast. "All right," the walrus-like creature growled back. "She's been here 5 years. The princess is 19 years old. She's old enough to make her own decisions. If she wants to ride off with you, she can." "I see you will not let her go without a fight," said the prince, who was the sort of person who was only capable of hearing the things he expected to hear. The walrus-like beast tried again. "Just one bit of advice. As you're riding off, don't go through the terrible woods. Go around them. The terrible woods are dangerous. The evil ogress queen will eat you if she gets the chance." "So now we must do battle," said the prince, as he began to draw his blade. "Fine, whatever," said the walrus-like beast. "Grrr, growl. You better sweep the princess onto your horse and ride off before I chase you." "I will sweep the princess onto my horse and ride off before you chase us," declared the prince. "My hero," said the princess, as he did just that. So they rode off, and the walrus-like beast, of course, did not bother to chase them. He did, though, ask one of the swallows in his garden to take a message for him to some friends of his, who he figured might be able to help them out if they took a wrong turn. And so the prince and princess happily rode along. Stumbling over my words there a little bit. But yes, they happily rode along. "You're so beautiful," said the prince. "You're so handsome," said the princess. "But you're so beautiful," said the prince. "But you're so handsome," said the princess. And their conversation went on like that for over an hour, and somehow neither of them were bored by it. Eventually, though, the princess said, "Which direction should we go? Should we go around the terrible woods?" "No," said the prince. "Obviously that was a trick to slow us down so the monster should catch us. We will ride straight through them." "Oh, I agree," said the princess. And so that is exactly what they did. Well, as they were riding into the woods, it got darker and darker. And as it got darker and darker, they got sleepier and sleepier, until they finally came to a somewhat creepy bench. And because neither of them had very much common sense, they decided that that would be a good spot to stop and rest. Now the ogress queen of the woods had ravens as her servants. And a couple of those ravens were perched in the tree above the bench. They decided to cause some trouble. "Your hat looks very stupid," said one of the ravens. "My hat is elegant," said the prince. "How dare you?" cried the princess. "You smell funny," said the other raven. "I smell like lavender," said the princess. "I smell like vanilla," said the prince. The ravens were quickly realizing that these were not the brightest spoons in the drawer. And remember, I definitely said that wrong. They were not the sharpest spoons in the drawer. And remember, a spoon is not even supposed to be sharp. But they were dull even for spoons, metaphorically speaking. So one of the ravens decided to test even further. "I am literally a raven sitting above your head causing trouble, but you're too stupid to understand this." "I am not stupid," said the princess. "How dare you call me stupid?" said the prince. And he jumped on his horse and rode off, abandoning the poor princess. Now, when the prince got back to his kingdom, there was a surprise waiting for him. Because while he had been gone, there had been a revolution, and the people of his kingdom had overthrown the monarchy and declared a republic. Now, fortunately for the prince, he had been trained by the best swordsman in the realm. And because he liked hitting things with swords, he actually paid attention to those lessons. So he was able to pivot and make a living for himself as a fencing tutor. Yeah, the kid actually made something of himself. I'm as surprised as you are. But as for the poor princess, the ravens figured that they could lure her away to be a snack for their queen. You see, the queen of the terrible woods was actually the younger sister of the witch from Hansel and Gretel. But she was even hungrier than her older sister. She was so terrible and scary that all of the people of her realm had fled to neighboring kingdoms. Yes, these countries had to make some adjustments to absorb the new population, but they all understood the importance of taking in refugees. They were good people, after all. The only exceptions were a band of rebels who stayed behind with the idea of overthrowing the queen and establishing a republic. But she ate them! She was indeed a very terrible ogress. However, the princess didn't know this, and the ravens lured her closer and closer to the heart of the forest. This way, they crowed, and then a little further on, this way, this way. And the princess, again, who didn't have much common sense, decided that following strange creaky voices into the heart of the terrible woods was the best thing she could possibly do. When she saw the queen in the distance, she was convinced that she'd made the right decision. After all, the ogress queen was beautiful. She was wearing a crown. She was dressed in royal clothing. The princess immediately felt a kinship for her, and she was about to run straight towards the evil queen when she heard behind her a sound. Psst! Psst! The princess turned around and saw a small woman hiding in the bushes. The woman was, in fact, an elf, who was older and wiser than the princess by far, although the princess didn't know this. "Don't go towards the queen," hissed the small woman. "She's going to have you for dinner." "Oh, that's nice," said the princess. "What's on the menu?" "You are," said the small woman. The princess furrowed her brows. She was confused. "Look at all the bones on the ground," the small woman hissed again. The princess looked around, and it finally registered that a lot of the bones surrounding the queen were human skulls. And for once, she processed the danger she was in. The princess started to whimper. The queen narrowed her eyes as she realized her prey might be about to flee. She smiled charmingly and started to walk, really sashay her way over towards where the princess was standing. "Don't worry," said the small woman. "I've arranged for a rescue. We have an air rescue coming." "What's an air rescue?" the princess asked. But just then, a giant swallow swooped down out of the sky, with another elf on her back. "Hurry up! Climb on!" she shouted. And the princess and the other elf woman both scampered onto the back of the swallow. "No!" shouted the queen, running forward to try to grab them off the bird. But it flapped its giant wings and lifted into the sky. "Come back! Lunch!" shouted the evil ogress queen, but it was too late. A swarm of ravens took off after the giant swallow. One of them couldn't do much against it, but all of them together might be able to bring it down. But fortunately it had enough of a head start, and it stayed ahead of them, until it landed far off in another part of the woods that was controlled by elves and fairies. And there it settled down among giant flowers, and the princess and the elf woman climbed off. It didn't take the elves and fairies long, though, to realize that they had a problem on their hands. The princess was very, very entitled, and so she went around demanding that people brush her hair and rub her feet, and expected to be treated like royalty. She tried to treat all of the elves and fairies who were proud free people like they were her servants. "Well," they said to each other, "the walrus-like beast did warn us that this could be a problem. What are we going to do?" Then one of the fairies said, "I have an idea. Let's have Granny Zoomzanny look after her." "Of course," they said. "If there's anyone who can teach this princess how to be a useful person, it's Granny Zoomzanny." Well, Granny Zoomzanny did try. She gave the princess a broom and showed her how to sweep. The princess just stared at her shocked. Granny Zoomzanny tried to teach the princess how to sew. The princess threw the needles down on the ground and stormed around the small room. "I shouldn't have to sew. I'm a princess," she declared, and Granny Zoomzanny had to spend the rest of the afternoon picking the needles back up off the ground so that no one would get hurt stepping on them. No matter what she did, she couldn't get the princess to understand that she might actually have to do something in the future. Now, as it turns out, Granny Zoomzanny was actually cousins with the princess's old nurse back before her kingdom was overthrown and turned into a republic. So she wrote her cousin asking for help, and her cousin, who knew that the princess had been sent off to stay with the walrus-like beast, looped him in on the conversation, and between various bird-borne messages over the course of about a month, they came up with a plan. They decided that the best thing to do was to try to marry the princess off into one of the few royal families remaining. There had been a lot of revolutions lately, so there weren't as many kingdoms left to choose from. So one day, Granny Zoomzanny went to the princess and said, "All right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to marry you off to a king so that you can become a queen." Suddenly, the princess was very interested, and for once she started paying attention. Now, the king of this kingdom has recently lost his wife, so he's on the market for another queen. The kingdom's a bit far off, though, so I'm going to put you in this magical boat. The boat will carry you off to this faraway kingdom. When you get out, you'll be met by a huntsman who's a friend of mine. He'll take you to a secret door in the palace gate, or a secret door in the palace wall. Obviously, a door in the palace gate wouldn't make sense. When you go through the door, you'll find yourself in the palace garden. there I want you to shout as loud as you can, 'Oh, woe is me!' and collapse. I think you'll figure out what to do after that." Well, although the princess wasn't sure exactly what she should do after that, she decided to give this plan a shot. And she actually followed the instructions very well. The boat carried her off to the faraway land. The huntsman smuggled her in to the palace garden. And she declared, "Oh, woe is me!" and collapsed. She, in fact, actually managed to pass out. Well, the servants saw her dramatic performance and her collapse, and even though they didn't know who she was, based on her clothes and her behavior, they figured she was at least nobility. So they took her into the palace and put her to bed there. Now, when she woke up, the princess started going about her usual behavior, demanding that people brush her hair, demanding that people rub her feet. And so the servants, based on this, came to the conclusion that she was indeed a real princess. No one else could have grown up to be quite so entitled. Now, the servants had a bit of a problem. You see, the widower king was starting to feel rather lonely. And so he had started to hint to some of the prettier servants in the palace that he might like to take them out on a date. Now, the palace servants, they knew that this could only end badly. After all, the king would eventually get bored of anyone he was taking on dates, and once they were no longer the king's favorite, the country's nobles would make life miserable for any woman who had previously held his attention. So they needed to distract him before things got too far. "Well, this princess, she's a real pain," they said. "But I'm pretty sure she's a real princess. She might be the solution to our problem." So they dressed the princess up in the nicest clothes they had, and they took her to introduce her to the widower king. And as soon as he saw her, he forgot all about asking the palace servants to go on dates, and declared that he wanted to marry her immediately. Well, for the princess, this seemed like a good deal. The only thing better than being a princess was being a queen. So they dressed her up in the traditional wedding apparel of that country, and the king and the princess were married, and she became his queen, and they lived happily ever after. Well, until there was a revolution in that land. And then the people of the country overthrew the monarchy, and they didn't need a queen anymore. And they declared that their country was now a republic. And so they took the beautiful palace garden and turned it into a public park. And it was there, in that public park, that the deposed queen fell to her knees and wept. She wept for the cruelty of the world and the cruelty of fate. And she wept because she would finally have to learn how to become a useful person after all. And so it was in that time and that land where such things happened.